Hello everyone,
I'm Weiqi Qian.
I would like to introduce an emergency scenario in Australia. Our main emergency concern is the growing mental and alcohol problem among Aboriginal Australians. Before we start, I would like to state the acknowledgement of the country. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this present is given, and pay my respect to elder past, present, and emerging. We choose the issue of suicide among Aboriginal Australian youth because Aboriginal mental health is facing long-term and systematic neglect. There is a lack of adequate psychological treatment facilities for the large number of Aboriginal people in Queensland and Torres Strait Island people in Australia. Among Aboriginal people who committed suicide, only 14.5% had received psychological treatment within 3 months. Moreover, there has been no downward trend in the number of suicides over a long period of time. Western Australia is the state with the most serious suicide among Aboriginal people. In Western Australia, the Kimberley region is one of the worst suicide areas. Forestry causing is the town with the most suicide in the region. The town has only 1,500 people, 80% of whom are Aboriginal. There have been many suicide and violence cases in the area, which have attracted the attention of many relevant agencies and the media. I collect a series of information and record tourist reports related to suicide cases for the recording. There are many related cases, but I pick up 2 most typical ones. The first case was a boy who tried to ask for help from others before committing suicide, but failed to get help. In despair, he chose to commit suicide. Another case was a girl who was 18 years old. When she was last seen, she was knocking on the window of her neighbor. It was later discovered that the girl had been poisoned by alcohol. These 2 cases illustrate the forestry causing faces a series of problems, including the lack of psychological rehabilitation system and rampant alcohol abuse. In order to fill the gap in the Aboriginal psychological system, some psychological skills for Aboriginal culture has been created. WSCY is one of the most famous skills, which has been localized for Aboriginal culture, and it's more in line with the assessment program of Aboriginal people. In addition, there are some organizations focus on improving the well-being and the mental health of Aboriginal people, including the National Indigenous Australian Agency and the Health Foundation. In response to the alcohol problem in forestry causing, many people hope to continue the alcohol restriction bill to reduce the alcohol problem of Aboriginal people. These are long-term methodologies in the problem of Aboriginal suicide. Yunhao is one of the most famous Aboriginal activists. She is from forestry causing and has encouraged a series of reform in Aboriginal policy to improve the well-being. One of her greatest discoveries is a facial alcohol spectrum disorder called FSD. This further proves the harm of alcohol to Aboriginal fetuses. Next, I will introduce possible solutions that industrial design can use to improve the suicide and the alcoholism problem in this region. Designing a venue in accordance with Aboriginal culture is a possible solution. Union Circle is one of the most important culture of Aboriginal people. This means features that people sit in the circle and communicate on an equal footing. If similar venues planned are designed locally and the traditional culture of Aboriginal people is encouraged, respect for equality will also mean that Aboriginal culture will be recognized, increasing their sense of identity and confidence. There are also handmade products with similar designs. There is a small handcraft shop in the local area, supporting the indigenous people to make handcraft and selling them. The popularity of indigenous handcraft is also one of the ways to enhance the sense of identity and self-confidence. Another possibility is to increase the number of alcohol substitutes, such as design some soda drink, which are not only healthy, but also in line with the traditional drink culture of indigenous people are reduce their alcohol dependence. The local weather also greatly affects the psychological problem of indigenous people. I looked up the local climate and found a picture showing the temperature and precipitation. In 2023, a flood submerged the town, displacing thousands of people. The lack of infrastructure and assistance further heightened the anxiety of the town's residents. Many people feel abandoned, and many mentioned that they saw the livestock they depended on the server being drowned by the flood, but they were unable to do anything. The flood not only was the psychological problem, but also transferred public attention. People began to focus on flood instead of more serious problems of alcohol and suicide. This made the situation worse. We must think about some possibilities to avoid the disaster from happening again. We need to make some possible designs based on the terrain to increase the sense of identity and reduce the risk. I create a graphic map of the area showing the location of the roads, towns, airports, and the river. According to the previous methodology, encouraging the indigenous people to do manual labor is one way to increase their sense of identity. Perhaps building dams to reduce potential flood threats and encouraging some volunteers. As for alcohol problem, we can refer to the original culture for various design. I look up some tropical original buildings. We can follow the traditional architecture design and set up various shops in 2 locations in the town to gradually replace the alcohol, strengthen the culture identity of residents, reduce alcohol dependence, and further solve the suicide problem.
The Fitzroy Planning Area is home to a rich and diverse range of plant species. However, 137 of these species are threatened or classified as a priority conservation target, including some aquatic plants and cytotoxins such as lichens, moss, and liverworts. Amongst them, the most valuable plants for conservation, which is listed as an endangered species under both the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act and the Western Australian Biodiversity Conservation Act 2016. The Fitzroy area is home to many famous native Australian animals such as platypus, kangaroos, and kookaburras. Moreover, there are some native animals here that have no other habitats in the whole Queensland, Australia, or even the world. There are many saltwater crocodiles in the Kimberley Waterway. When designing the area along the lake of the Kimberley Waterway, we need to carefully consider the living habits of saltwater crocodiles, protect their habits, and at the same time be cautious to prevent them from attacking people so as to achieve harmonious coexist between human and natural. This is one of the few places in northern Australia where the endangered northern river shark, 3 species of vulnerable freshwater swordfish, as well as rock kangaroos and rabbit-eared bandicoots can be found. However, it is facing threats. The people of Nikina and Mangala are concerned about the impact of activities such as wildfires, mining, exploration, irregular tourism, and irregular agriculture on their country. All this activity may cause damage to fragile cultural sites, previous water source, and pose a threat to flora and fauna. As Qian mentioned before, alcohol is the main cause of suicide among teenagers. The annual per capita pure alcohol consumption in Australia ranks amongst the highest in the world. Before the alcohol restrictions were implemented in 2007, the annual per capita alcohol consumption in Fitzroy inner city is estimated to be 27 liters, more than 3 times the national average, equality to 75 cans of beer per person per week in the area. Local parties are frequent, and even pregnant women drinking during this period, leading to a series of alcohol-related fetal disease. FASD refers to a series of diseases caused by alcohol exposure in the womb. People with FASD may experience a series of cognitive, social, and behavioral difficulties, including memory, impulse control, and difficulty in linking behavior with consequences. The local potential risks such as floods and violence, etc., will be explained more in detail by my other groupmate Bai later. For the indigenous people, the Fitzroy River is a living water, and it is closely linked to spirituality, food, medical, cultural custom, entertainment, as well as the passing on of traditional knowledge to the next generation. The government of Western Australia has been discussing with the people in the Fitzroy River region about the opportunity to achieve sustainable economy development while protecting the river and its catchment area. The artistic tradition of the Aboriginal people in Australia are extremely ancient, dating back to 50,000 years ago. In the Kimberley region, rocks sites are particularly important for traditional landowner because they are the records left by the ancestors. These works are not just visual displays but also carry profound cultural and spiritual significance, reflecting the Aboriginal people's love and respect for the land. Because land and river are considered sacred by indigenous people, in design projects involving these natural resources, we must take measures to protect the ecological environment. For example, in the project in Fitzroy River area, environmental-friendly riverbank protection measures can be designed to reduce erosion and pollution. When doing multicultural background research, one should investigate the customs and taboos of each tribe well. One should not serve only a certain tribe, but also take into account everyone. Before the design, it was necessary to understand the cultural differences and sensitivities of different tribes. The political stance of the Fitzroy River Council is primarily reversed in their insistence on traditional rights. Through documents such as the Fitzroy River Declaration and the First Law, they explicitly assert the traditional rights and management rights of the indigenous people over the Fitzroy River and its basin. For the appropriate political environment we need to respect their rights. The design project should support the self-management and decision-making rights of indigenous communities. And also, the ecological design principles are adopted in the design to ensure that the project's impact on the environment is minimized.
Hi, I'm Yunhao Bai, and I'm going to carry on the presentation from this slide. So how might these inhabitants with special needs to be catered for? At Fitzroy Crossing, there are only about 1,500 people, with a majority of them being Aboriginals. And 1,500 miles remoteness from the state capital of Perth makes it very difficult to have supplies and personnel in. Since a number of potential dangers are happening to the place, the adoption of holistic community-led local cultural respect is necessary. In addition, local service personnel training provided by Australian government is critical in order to ensure inhabitants' security under potential dangerous situation. Furthermore, the importance of developing local accommodation and care services worth government's attention. So the potential dangers, the first potential danger is flooding. So Fitzroy Crossing is highly susceptible to flooding situation, especially during the summer. Between December 2022 and January 2023, the ex-tropical cyclone Ellie resulted in a significant flooding in the Kimberley region. The major highway of the area and the Fitzroy Bridge was damaged to an unrepairable status. Remoteness meaning it is very difficult to have supplies and personnel to reach flood-affected areas, especially after major roads are being damaged. This resulted in an overall community damage, including the loss of tourism, the collapse of right industries, and also disruptions to flood supply and breakage of transportations. And the wildlife is also another potential dangers of the area. Due to heavy flooding and wet seasons, wildlife of Fitzroy Crossing with serious safety precautions. Saltwater crocodiles are very dangerous and often appear deep in the muddy water where they are not easily spotted. They could easily pose threats to local inhabitants. And then is waterborne diseases, and potentially deadly amoebas and bacteria had been detected in water supplies of remote Aboriginal communities in Fitzroy Crossing. Stores are few in numbers and often located distantly, making it very difficult to buy drinking waters. And chlorinatory related technical fault was likely a fault according to researchers. Risks of infection can be fatal even when water entered the nose by force, especially when children submerge themselves underwater or playing with the hoses. And moving on to the next potential danger, which is the violence and assault. So domestic violence and juvenile crime are two major potential dangers on violence and assault at Fitzroy Crossing. A majority of these accidents are linked to the situation of alcohol abuse. Intergenerational trauma, historical poverty, and social disadvantage are also interconnected factors that resulted in various violences and assaults of the area. So, how can we mitigate the potential dangers through our design? So, the first issue is flooding, which we can design in adequate emergency shelters where local inhabitants can easily access to, and building houses with stilted and elevated design principles incorporated to resist flooding. And the second part of the potential dangers are the wildlife, which having adequate protection in wildlife hazardous areas such as designing guiding boards and setting up fences as warning signs to prevent tragedies is the solution. The third part is waterborne diseases, which we're gonna focus on the path of clean water reservoir and designing with considerations based on elevation, location, and sewage, avoiding contaminated areas. And last but not least, the violence and assaults. So designing alcohol-free recreation centers and developing non-alcohol beverage to reduce the possibility on risky behaviors and violence. And moving on to the chronic issues and potential issues and ongoing human rights emergencies. So the first is definitely the access to health and education. And as chronic diseases are relatively common due to the lack of proper medical access in the area, and inhabitants always spend large amount of time for long distance traveling for medical treatments due to the remoteness of the area. And cultural disconnection and local economy makes it very difficult for children to get access to schools and education resources. The second part is the racism and discrimination, with most of the Fitzroy Crossing inhabitants being Aboriginals, so they kind of facing a lot of political and justical and resource oriented and employment related inequalities. And the third part of these is alcohol abuse. And alcohol abuse is resulted in significant amount of violences and assaults, including domestic violences and juvenile crimes. And also FASD, which is known as the Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, was a lifelong pre-birth disability mainly due to alcohol consumptions by nearly 20% of women during their pregnancies in Fitzroy Crossing. These will result in a long-term effect among children's health conditions and cognitive abilities. Last but not least, the housing and living conditions, with overcrowded living in poor housing infrastructures due to the local economy issues and the lack of government support. And since flooding is a potential danger in Fitzroy Crossing, especially during the wet season, house and infrastructure damage are also potential. The 2023 Fitzroy Valley flooding has devastated local houses and environment. Long-term housing restoration is inevitable due to the lack of local assistance and difficulties in resource transportation attributed to its remoteness. So how can we help address these issues via design? So the first part is the access to health and education. So we can design more mobile clinics will help preventing local inhabitants from traveling far away to have a medical care access. In addition, building schools incorporating artworks, signs, symbols from Aboriginal traditional crafts and materials to inherit and promote the Aboriginal culture while providing learning hubs for the local children. And the second part is racism and discrimination, which we have to design tourism sites with stylish buildings including Aboriginal elements such as artwork, language, signs, and symbols to reflect cultural values. This will attract outside attentions and prevent further increasing discriminations. In terms of the alcohol abuse, using local floral plants to develop special drinks that are non-alcoholic and can provide health alternatives instead of harms, like the bush tucker soda that was mentioned in the previous slides, for the local community. This can make sure the inhabitants to enjoy the refreshing feelings of the beverage while ensuring healthy and safety. And last but not least, housing and living. Designing houses that are prone to resist natural disasters, such as incorporating stilted and elevated design principles to reduce damage from the flooding. In addition, designing community-based shared infrastructures, revising houses with better configuration and ventilation will aid the overall living issue. And these are the references of our presentation. Thanks for watching.